Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Sandrine Monin, and it's a privilege to be here in front of you. I'm a white woman in her 30s. I have dark, short hair and blonde, long fringe swept to one side. My pronouns are she, her. And as you can probably hear, I am French. I am also the artistic director and founder of Unbound Dance Theatre. We are a company that focuses on making dance more accessible for blind and visually impaired people. And today, we're gonna present to you our work, our research, and the incredible people we have been working with the past 2.5 years. We are at Yorkshire Dance in their studio theatre space. The floor is wooden, but the dancing space is covered with a black lino. The walls have bricks and many windows which have been covered by blinds. And the back room has a long length black curtain. We have an audience in a raked seating arrangement. And we also we are live streaming, and the camera is just behind the audience. Oh, I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit nervous. So if you can probably hear this in my voice, this is a project that in a way started 4 years ago. That's when I delivered my first ever dance workshop in the blind and visually impaired community. And when I say 4 years ago, that's precisely March 2020, which was not necessarily the best time to start anything in person, but it really planted the seeds, and as soon as I could, I started the project again. And ever since, it has been a huge, huge learning curve for me, working with the blind and visually impaired community. Dance for me has always been a little bit of a sanctuary, a place where I could feel myself, a place of belonging, a place where I could be free and could kind of get lost. And since my earliest memories, that's all I've ever wanted to do. And it was my passion and my refuge as well. But throughout my training years, and then in the professional world again, I have felt the pressure of kind of following certain expectation or to try and contort myself in some labels. And I have witnessed many, many times how exclusive dance can be. But today, we're here to talk about how inclusive, and its huge, huge, huge potential for inclusivity. Working with blind and visually impaired people has been a profound turning point, and when I say profound, I absolutely mean it. It's by shifting my perspective to their unique and multiple perspective, because every sight loss is different. I've had to rethink about the limitation that we put on dance through the visual lens. And I've had to redefine my idea of what the purpose of dance was. Because I don't think dance is about a shape. Dance is not about a flow. It's not about a choreography or a performance. I don't think it's even about a narrative or a story. Those things are important, but I think deep down, dance is about connection. Connection to the self, to your body, connection to others, and then connection to the world. Now, before we start delving into all the research and the work we have done, I would ask everybody to take a moment to close your eyes, please. So you can just close your eyes and just take a moment to be. Take a moment to ask yourself, how am I feeling right now, today? And there's nothing right, there's nothing wrong, just notice what is the feeling that is coming up. Notice your feet on the floor, your contact with the bench or the chairs you sat on. Anchor yourself down, feel your weight dropping, and at the same time feel like you've got some energy lifting up through your spine and reaching up towards the ceiling. And feel your breath. Feel that constant movement coming in and out of your body. Your body expanding as you inhale and softening as you exhale. And as you're becoming aware of your breath, start to listen to your breath as well. Listen to your inner sounds. And as you're listening to the sounds that are coming from your own body, you're probably going to become aware of the sound that's surrounding you. Maybe the person breathing next to you. And maybe further away, the traffic, squeaky floor, maybe some birds. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to breathe in and breathe out. And you're going to have the choice to keep your eyes shut a little while longer or to open them. But while you had your eyes shut, 8 performers have taken the stage. We have lowered the light. And we're going to show you a performance from our Leeds community group. Some performers have visual impairment, some don't. We have a cast ranging from 20-year-old to people in their 60s, all genders. They are wearing light and flowy material tops and trousers. And the rest of the performance is not audio-described per se. However, 4 of the performers are wearing sensors. And with those sensors, they're going to create the sound that you're going to hear through their movement. The sounds are really closely connected to the movement they will be embodying. So it's very much an invitation for you to open your senses, to listen to the sounds, to feel the sounds inside of your body, and let the sounds move you like they move the performers. They're going to take you through a crunchy forest that will become increasingly difficult to navigate. They will eventually nudge each other playfully into awakening, so much so that they're going to be swiped up in a windstorm, to eventually softly float back down into water to sway with the waves. So listen to all these elements, feel them inside of your body, and enjoy this sensory performance. Thank you so much, everybody. We've actually had quite a bit of technical issue. And we think, we have a theory that the technology feels the stress, and whenever we have something really important, it drops out. So there were a few moments when the sensor actually just, the end, Mercy, as she was kind of swaying in front of the group, you would have had the sound of water, and she would have led you through the waves, but we missed our waves. I'm sorry, Mercy. But you still got an idea of what was happening. I'm sure you got an idea there was some things not going so well. But it's been part of our work. It's been a lot of trial and error and testing things and seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and really learning from that, building from this, and trying to get better at what we are doing. So the group that you just saw was our Leeds community group. We are also running regular workshops tailored for blind and visually impaired people in Bradford. Earlier this year, we've done outreach in London, and later on we will be in Harrogate this summer. Our aim is to create inclusive space and to develop tools and methods to make dance more accessible. And like I was saying, it's been really a journey of exploration, of innovation with everything that innovation means, and a lot of collaboration. Our initial focus has been making dance more accessible for visually impaired as active participants. So how could we bring blind visually impaired people as participants in workshops, in classes, in week-long residencies, and also in performances? So that was really the first part of our research. And as I was saying, has not been linear, but we're slowly learning. And one of our first learning, and I think what really lies at the heart of all the work we're doing, is to create supportive and inclusive spaces. And that's been really informed by the work we've done with Jen Toksvig, who's going to talk to us a little bit later on inclusivity. Helped us understand inclusivity as a whole, but also build the company on really strong values. So our values are connection, acceptance, growth, and expression. And any of these values, to achieve any of these, you need trust at the root of everything. So that's one of our kind of most important thing is trust. So we first talked with blind and visually impaired charities. We've started advertising the workshop through their channel. They came and joined their service users in the first workshops. And as a company, we also offer travel support for the participant to come. Our first aim was to create safety, dignity, transparency, and kindness. And then all our work kind of revolves from that. To talk to you a little bit more about how we do our work, as I say, from the get-go, the right environment. So from the beginning, the really establishing aims, expectation, structure, and boundaries. And we kind of call it, I call it, the winter stage. So that's when people come in, get to know each other, we do a get-in, we really talk, we make sure everybody has all the information they need to feel safe. Sometimes we take a whole walk through the space to make sure they know what the space feels like. And then it's very much, this stage is very much like a consent agreement. So making sure everybody knows everything. It's a shared responsibility, shared accountability across everyone, the participant, the facilitator, and the assistants as well. And this understanding has been underpinned by our work with Jen Wilson on consent practice, who's going to talk to you a little bit later on today. From this kind of consent understanding, we need to make sure people know that they can opt out. Halfway through the session, they can decide to sit down. If they need to adapt anything, they adapt. One thing that constantly came up in our conversation was the fear of getting things wrong, the fear of making mistakes. So we had to create a space where there was no wrong and there was no right, a place where you just explore and you feel free, a place where you can just be curious and you have possibilities and you are playful. I think that was really important to set up this kind of atmosphere. And then, only then, we can move into the dance. And when we start moving into the dance activity, the first thing that I ask the participant is what I've asked you, is to close their eyes, if they're feeling comfortable with it, obviously. And it's because in our workshop, we really aim to kind of level the playing field, because people with visual impairments spend their life adapting in a sighted world. So when they come in our workshop, we don't want them to have to do that. We want to try as much as possible for them to not have to do that. And then from there, we kind of anchor, we do some breathing, we feel our body, sensation, emotion, pretty much like we did earlier, but just a lot longer. And then eventually, it's very much about feeling at home with your body and kind of learning to trust your own body. From then, we can move into the spring stage, which is more about growth and awakening, and that's where the participants embark in immersive tasks and exercises through guided improvisation, and they really tap into the creativity and the imagination, and it can be very immersive and mindful and quite meditative, and a lot of the participants often said that it really contributed to positively impact their mental health and their confidence. Like, for example, one of the participants, after a task when we were exploring our back body and the connection between our head and our neck, they really reported a kind of newly found sense of freedom, whether physically, mentally, and emotionally, because they explained that in their everyday life, they just scan. It's all about scanning. It's all about being almost the apprehension of an obstacle. And in a safe space, they could just feel free, lift their head up, and just not have to think about this. So that really shows how much dance and movement can really contribute to people's well-being, really. And then from this point, another very important thing in our work is sound. It went a little bit wrong. But in workshop, it's really about playing. And our work with sound has been really informed by the work I've done with Maria Capsali, and understanding how to work with sound and the sensors as tool for accessibility. They really help, in a way, kind of bypass the initial self-consciousness that you can feel when you're asked to dance. So that was kind of really good way in. And then the participant can really let themselves feel free to explore the connection between movement and sounds and get lost, really. You know how you can get lost in sound? You end up getting lost in movements in the same way. And those sensors really give a sense of power and agency and control, because through these little devices, it's just a little square that they can hold or wear, they can guide each other and they can connect with one another without having to see each other. So it's been quite a discovery and a beautiful experience to kind of develop this approach all together, because it's really a collaborative work. And from this kind of heightened body awareness and heightened sensory awareness, then we can move into the summer stage. And the summer stage is very much when we open and we connect. And it can take various forms. It can be contact improvisation. We can work in pair, we work in groups, we work with the sounds, we work on exploring specific emotion and how they make us move, or exploring memory, or past or childhood memory. And that's where a lot of our creative work and our choreographic work stems from, all this exploration, and then we shape it into full work. But this exploration offers so much collaboration and, again, agency, and it really allows people to just express themselves fully and to use dance and movement as a new language to communicate their stories, to communicate their emotion. And we had the beautiful example, I mean, we have many, many beautiful examples, but one that really stays with me now still was during one of our R&D quite early on when we were researching our full work. The task that we set up was for one of the performers to kind of recount one of their childhood memory, and for the other dancers to reenact, physicalize that story. And through this task, the person was telling their story, somehow managed to gain a sense of perspective on their story and to feel this new empathy towards some of the character that's part of their life story, but they had never felt this kind of empathy towards them. And that was just, I mean, there was a lot of cry and tears and emotion. It was just beautiful. But it really shows how much movement can help access memory and then kind of reintegrate those memory into a wider context and a wider perspective. And what we discover time and time again is that just the all benefits that dance can bring for people with visual impairments, but for the dancers, I think they got the exact, like the sighted dancers got the exact same amount of benefits, and I think anyone, non-dancers, dancers, anyone just could benefit so much from doing more movement and more dance. One more point that I'd like to make that as a company we think is very, very important is vulnerability. And when you show up as a facilitator, and I've made that mistake at first, you kind of plan and you know everything's gonna happen this way, and you're not quite your full self because you kind of anticipate and you don't work with the people that are in front of you. You have to learn when you enter the space that both sides, the facilitator and the participants, everybody needs to drop their shield and everybody needs to be their full self. And then from them, magic happens really. But you have to be able to do that. And while vulnerability is required, needed, putting some boundaries in place is really important as well, because we're not a therapy group. We're not trained therapists, and we need to make sure people are safe and are responsible for themselves and what they want to share. And also that when they go home, they're okay. So it's really important to keep this secure. That understanding has really been supported by Helen, one of our guest speakers later on, and one of our performers. That leads me to how you close a session. And that's really important to make sure you do close a session. You can't just walk away after having opened a chair. You kind of become porous in these spaces. So you need to make sure you take, it doesn't have to be long, but you need to take a moment to kind of debrief, ground yourself, find your boundaries again, make sure everybody is okay, and then you can just go, because it's a space of holding and listening, and we build a lot of resilience, I think, through our community. But we need to make sure when we separate, we're still okay. So throughout my presentation, you would have understand that inclusivity, values, sound, emotional safety, and consent are really, really kind of inherent part of our research. And while I kind of merge them all into a dance practice, our guest speakers today are going to take you to each individual aspect a little bit deeper and a little bit wider. And I hope you really enjoy, because they've all contributed immensely to the understanding on how I work and how I want to work, making my processes conscious and making sure I can then replicate them. So before I introduce them all, I want to say thank you to all of you. So I'm going to introduce to our first speaker, Maria Capsali, from the School of Performance and Cultural Industry at Leeds University. Maria was the first person that kind of blew my mind and my ears.
Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Thank you for inviting me, Sandrine. It's lovely to have you all here today. I'm a white woman in my mid-40s with dark brown hair and dark eyes. I'm wearing a pair of jeans and a green top and a blue vest. I'm holding pieces of paper and a notebook. As a preface, I would like to read the beginning and end from a poem by Mary Oliver called Wild Geese, and hopefully it will make sense why I chose this poem and how it relates to what Sandrine was talking about and what I'm going to talk about. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert, repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls you to it like the wind, like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over, announcing your place in the family of things. I joined the project both as an academic researcher and a creative practitioner, with the aim to support Sandrine and the project participants in the use of a wearable technology for sound and movement interaction, as well as with the aim to study how Sandrine and the project participants used and experienced the technology. On my wrist, I'm wearing a square-shaped object, a bit bigger than a matchbox. Inside this square, there is a sensor and a rechargeable battery. The sensor is connected via Bluetooth to a laptop, sometimes, and is sending to the laptop data in real time, sometimes, about my motion, specifically the tilt, rotation, and spin of the part of the body that is holding the sensor. These data are processed through a custom-made software and become translated into sound in real time. The software also includes a visual interface that I can see on a computer screen, and through this interface I can choose the specific sound I want to work with each time. There is a variety of sounds I can choose from. You heard some of them already, including the sound of acoustic instruments. Sandrine, if we can have the harp up, please. Compositions of texture-based sounds. As well as field recordings. This is ECOM, a wearable technology for sound and movement interaction that can be used in real-life environments and requires no technical expertise or setup, but a lot of nerve, as you witnessed. I would like to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about the role that the particular technology has had in this project and how it encompasses and facilitates the company's mission, which, as Sandrine was just telling us, is to champion inclusivity, connection, and expression, specifically in relation to the experience of visual impairment and blindness. Sandrine and I met in 2021 when Sandrine visited Inside Yellow Sound, an installation I created with a group of artists and academics at the University of Leeds. The installation was based on a stage composition developed by painter Vasily Kandinsky in 1909 and explored how the use of ECOM could both foreground the synesthetic quality that is at the heart of Kandinsky's work, as well as render the composition accessible to people with visual impairment or blindness. As you already heard, Sandrine had already done some work on developing a dance approach for participants with visual impairment, and she also enjoyed the installation, so we both became interested in working together. The summer of that year, Sandrine, dancer Sophia Older, and I worked together on the development of a pedagogy for the use of ECOM in dance practice. Some of the questions we asked were: how can ECOM enable creative expression as well as development of material for performance? What kind of skills can the creative use of ECOM foster? How do these skills compare with existing skills in dance and movement training? How can the insights we gain in the studio be communicated to other practitioners? At the heart of these sessions was the idea that when we're working with this technology, the perception and making of sound is closely intertwined with the perception and making of movement. I use the word kinesonic to capture this close intertwining. Kinesonic is a composite word from the words kinesthetic and sonic, and aims to name an embodied experience whereby acts of sounding and listening are informed by kinesthetic awareness, and acts of moving are shaped by auditory perception and listening. These sessions resulted in the creation of 9 videos called Kinesonic Embodiment, which you can find on the ICOM website, and offer a range of practical activities on what a group of practitioners can do in the studio and how they can progress from simple to more complex tasks. These sessions offered for the basis for the creative approach that Sandrine and I began using together with a Leeds-based group of this project, as well as separately from each other. So what I would like to do with this talk is bring attention to 2 key points where the mission of Unbound meets the principles that lead the development of ECOM. One is accessibility, and the other one is the role of vision in dance. So I will start with accessibility. One of the principles that both Sandrine and I shared were the conviction that accessibility is not a set of adjustments that become retrofitted to a performance or a workshop once the performance or workshop are ready to go. Rather, accessibility is the ground on which any collaboration or encounter begins. Both Sandrine and I, therefore, begin with the assumption that each person, whether this is an audience member, a workshop participant, or a collaborator, will bring to a performance or creative process their unique experience of what Tobin Siebers calls complex embodiment. The needs, preferences, trainings, habits, and social inscriptions that constitute and shape a person's engagement with the world and with an artwork. This is not to erase the very real biological markers of impairment and the very real social inequalities of disability. This is not to say that because we're all different, difference does not matter. It does. It is rather a way of keeping in mind that each person is embodied and that embodied experience is contextual, multidimensional, and processual. Disability is not something fixed, both because the impairment that relates to the disability may be different over time, as well as because embodied experience by default is contingent upon many factors: the weather, the satisfaction of basic needs, connection with others, to name just a few. Within a professional dance environment, this idea of complex embodiment is also a way of acknowledging that different forms of embodiment feature different kinds of skills, competencies, and value systems. Within any creative process, therefore, it becomes important, as Sandrine already said, to be transparent about and, if possible, share the values that guide each person's process and decision-making. Although the ethos I'm describing is commonly shared, there is still a divide between so-called professional dance practice and so-called community practice. The divide is not simply about who gets to participate and under what terms, but also what as a society we consider to be dance. What dance should look like? When dance is good? What kind of bodies and persons can dance? It would be fair to say that Sandrine and I share a deep suspicion of this divide, and as you may know already, Sandrine's work also includes a long and very successful involvement with professional dance practice. And I asked her once why she decided to leave this world, and she told me that she got bored. So we are both suspicious, and maybe we're bored as well of this divide, and especially the way it becomes mobilized towards the maintenance of oppressive hierarchies. So you might have heard about dance degrees and dance departments closing down across the country. Unfortunately, the one offered by Leeds Beckett is also being discontinued. And just to give you a recent example of what I have in mind, on the 4th of April, the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, and I quote from The Guardian, told the Office for Students to freeze grants intended to meet the extra costs of offering music, drama, fashion, and other arts courses for undergraduates, and for it to cut grants for postgraduate teaching in those subjects. Okay? So any public investment towards creative arts and performing arts courses is being discontinued. I mean, that's nothing new, but listen to this bit. I'm quoting. However, funding for what Keegan called our world-leading small and specialist providers, such as the Royal Colleges of Music, would be protected through an additional grant. Okay, so the way I read this, maybe you have different, you see it differently, but the way I read this is that this is a propagation of a very elitist point of view, where the kind of dance and the kind of music that we can put on big stages and export abroad is the kind of thing we support, whereas any other form of creative expression for anyone else who does not aspire to this level is not worth public investment. Although watching the movement of strong, athletic, able bodies is a source of pleasure and aspiration, expression and the potential of an expressive act to move others is not limited to youth or even professional training. In fact, one could argue that if performing arts only show the bodies of the professionally trained, we miss a very powerful way of understanding how everyone else experiences the world. By prioritizing the trained dancer, who is often white, usually under 35 years old and nearly always able-bodied, we only see a very specific part of the population, and as a result, we limit the possibility that the performing arts offer us for learning about and understanding each other. What I find exciting is that within professional dance training, there is a recognition of the need to foster the students' ability to connect with others. In her introduction to the volume Ethical Agility, Noyal Colin explains, I quote, "The etymological root of technique, which is techni, refers to the craft of doing things well. To explore the ethical aspect of techniques in dance is to ask if dancing well can be considered an action in the service of the good, or, in other words, what are the techniques that develop the training of dance as an ethical action?" The work of Unbound Dance Theatre, therefore, is exciting not because a group of professional dancers is working with people who do not have a professional dance background. What is interesting here is that the embodied experience of both of these groups matters and is considered a valid mode of expression. From my perspective, therefore, as an academic researcher, I see Unbound Dance Theatre as a powerful way to exemplify the way dance practice can cut across externally imposed hierarchies and offer a model for a truly inclusive, ethically oriented way of working. We are indeed. The use of ECAM within this project is of particular interest. As I've already implied, sound and movement interaction is an evolving practice, which at the moment has no fixed vocabulary and quality benchmarks. And one of the things Sandrine and I are doing is to develop the skills and qualities that make up good practice. Therefore, when we enter the space of this project, it is with an attitude of curiosity, an openness to trial and error, and an acute attention to what is happening in the moment, rather than a preconceived idea of how a moment should look or sound like, because we don't know. Accessibility, therefore, is not only about ensuring access, it is also about starting from the assumption that knowledge, skill, beauty may manifest in ways we're not taught to expect or recognize. The ability to be open to these moments, to allow these moments to access us, requires constant work. And if you want, this is the work we have committed to be doing together. And this brings me to the second point, which is the question of the sensory modalities involved in dancing and performing dance. Dance involves the motion of the body in space and time, but for reasons I won't go in right now, it has been reduced to a visual spectacle. In a recent article that explores accessibility of dance for non-sighted audiences, Blessing and Zimmerman explain, I quote, "Dance is brought on stage in order to be watched, and even though this visual experience of moving bodies can elicit a variety of multimodal perceptions, It is always conceptualized to be visual in the first place. But does this mean that dance as an art form and aesthetic experience is by definition only accessible to a sighted audience? If dance is conceptualized foremost through acts of seeing, visual impairment and blindness are by default a problem. This is often addressed by recruiting the other senses as a compensatory mechanism. For example, some of the techniques for making dance accessible to blind and visually impaired audiences includes audio description and touch doors. Sound and movement interaction technologies have also been used, both in dance training and performance, to translate movement into sound. These techniques can be useful, and there's been very rich professional practice going into developing them. However, investing in these techniques only may stop us from asking groundbreaking questions. Why is dance so closely related to vision? Is vision an essential aspect of dance? Can we think and practice dance beyond vision? The second thing that I find very exciting is that Unbound Dance Theatre is taking up these questions and, in fact, as you heard before, sets out to break free from the confines of visual norms. So Sandrine already explained the profound impact that her work with blind and visually impaired people had on the practice. So really, the purpose of this company becomes to redefine dance. I would like to think that the use of ACOM in this project can serve this wider aim. As I explained already, the activities with ACOM strive to foster a form of kinesonic embodiment, a form of sensory experience where dance and music, sound and movement are in reciprocal relationship, constantly informing one another. The wider aim is to provide a framework for creative exploration which moves beyond the existing demarcation of the senses in the 5 ones we know from the Western canon: sound, vision, touch, smell, and taste. Thank you. Interestingly, anthropologist David House points out, I quote, that which senses are counted and what counts as a sense are not physiological universals, but shaped by culture. House also argues that within Western culture, the separation of the senses in discrete sensory streams is ideologically and politically connected with the separation of people in individuals. He argues that an ideology of sensory exclusivity is symptomatic of a society that is centered on the autonomous individual rather than the relations between individuals. So what House and other anthropologists and choreomusicologists talk about, especially when they study the work of non-Western cultures, the performing traditions of non-Western cultures, is that the way the sensory organism is structured, and the way it is structured in the West is according to the 5 senses, actually maps to social structures. And in those societies where senses are understood to be a lot more synesthetic and the experience is considered a lot more transsensorial, there is actually a lot more relationships of kinship, and an individual, a person, is understood in terms of their relationship to others rather than as an autonomous person. And what we've got in the West is a discrete separation of those 5 senses, and accordingly, on a social level, we have a very discrete separation of individuals, of persons in individuals. A technology and pedagogy for sound and movement interaction can therefore offer the opportunity for experiencing and thinking about sensory perception in new ways. We might not yet have a language to fully account for this experience, but through creative work, such as the one that happens within this company and in this very studio, we can begin to gain an understanding of its contour. Most importantly, working in this way can turn perceptions of sound, gravity, locomotion, and breath to become places where we can meet each other through what Mary Oliver calls the soft animal of our body. Thank you.
So if you, if you have any question for Maria, please feel free to ask them. I'm coming.
Thank you. I wondered, and it might be beyond the scope of the kind of current research project, but whether you'd explored translating movement into other senses as well, into touch or smell or taste, or mixtures of the above, or thus far we just worked with sound.
Thank you. A tiny bit. There is an engineer in University of Leeds where I work, where he's very interested in developing haptics, both as a creative and as an assistive technology, and he's using ECOM because ECOM is already set up in this way. And what he does is he takes the sound and translates it into vibration. So the idea is that as somebody moves, the movement via this system translates into vibration, which can be felt by the person who moves or by someone else. Thank you.
You spoke about kinship within societies less sensory. Is there anything in your research thus far that has kind of progressed into what we can do as individuals in a Western society to kind of develop that kinship more?
Yeah, thank you. That is the question, really, isn't it? So just to clarify, the argument, if you want, or what the research shows, is that in societies, it's not a question of how much sensory input or perception is there. It's how that becomes classified within a system. So, for example, in other forms of dance, there is no separation between dance music. It's considered one thing because it's transsensorial. So in terms of what's happening here, I think there is a lot we can do. I think the kind of work that happens within this project is a very good example. I think also working outdoors, and there is quite a lot of work within both dance and somatic practitioners who are working outdoors. And again, as Sandrine mentions, I think dance practice and movement practices, we have such a rich toolkit. We have such a big bag of tools to enable connections between people and connections between human and non-human others. So I think it's just about, and especially with the onslaught on dance courses in academia and the kind of rhetoric we see around that, I think it's absolutely central that people come together, that we know each other, that we practice together, that our sector is healthy and vibrant, and there are so many ways in which this can happen.
Any other question? No more questions? Do we have any questions online?
There is one.
Sorry. You touched on it at the end about the collaboration, really, and it was really asking how do other practitioners that aren't maybe in the dance world kind of can support that collaboration? Because I know Helen's talking a little bit later on about taking a trauma-informed approach. So how does that support? Because obviously it's quite soul-destroying listening to when you were talking about the funding being cut, and it's very short-sighted of the government that they can't see how that then is actually not being inclusive and pushing sort of other people out of that arena, so to speak. So yeah, I'd be interested to hear more about where the company is going regarding collaboration.
With non-dancers, you mean, or people from other professional backgrounds?
Yeah, I suppose you'll probably see a route through with other dancers, but somebody like myself isn't within the dance world. But obviously there's an arena then to kind of work collaboratively to look at how you can showcase this and almost like challenge then people's thinking about being inclusive. because it's quite a statement that you made before about the funding, and when you put it like that, it's like, that is wrong on every level. Sorry, just felt like a voice.
Well, I don't know if Sandrine, if you've got ideas specifically about what you're thinking about the company, but I think in broader terms, I think first of all is just, and this is like, again, one thing that we can do for each other, is this idea that we're all bodies. Humans can't exist without a body. You know, you can't leave your body at home. And it's through our embodied experiences where we can open up and engage with one another on a much more humane level. And I think this is something the world needs right now. So yes, there is something about making those practices as healthy and as powerful as possible, and sharing them and kind of talking to the powers about their importance. But then it's also, the way I experience it is very much like a practice each individual can do every day, because my experience has been that it is so easy to become very disembodied and very much in one's head, and very, very much overwhelmed by information, by stress, all kinds of things that are going on. And there is something about being able to go back to this, and from this open up to other people. And I think that's the daily practice. But maybe, yeah, on a kind of a
I mean, that's
policy.
such a big question. I'm going to feedback if I go there. I think just what you say, we interact with the world through movement. So technically, we are constantly dancing. And I think it's making way into consciousness that dance is not this high ground, hierarchical things that you get to watch if you've been kind of groomed into it. It's something that can be experienced by anyone, and it's for anyone, because we live it every day. I know I'm not answering the question, but I think it's making a point that movement and dance are part of the everyday life, and it's so beneficial. So I think you were talking about collaboration. I think collaboration with the health sector is a very strong angle to go towards, because of all the benefits that you can have with dance. It's also making sure that this kind of work and inclusive work is not on the outskirts of the dance industry, but it's in the heart of the dance industry, and it's taught in college and higher education, and students are aware that it's one part of, it's not just one little part, it should be encompassing the whole of dance practice, because the dance world really needs more of this. Because there's a lot of toxicity, there's a lot of non-consent practice, there's a lot of exclusivity. And I think if we bring more inclusivity in dance industry as a whole, we will make our point on how it is useful for society.
It's what we're doing today, so
I'm being called.
We have a question online from Rebecca, who asks, Maria, where could we find any reading material from you, please?
Oh, I can put the website on the ECOM website, a link to the ECOM website on. Can we put it on YouTube?
So the link, we might be able to put it on YouTube. Sorry, we might be able to put on YouTube. And also you have, if you have signed up to the Eventbrite event, there is a link with the symposium with all the information about all the guests, their websites, the information about the company. So if you just go on the Eventbrite page, for my live audience, there is QR codes a little bit scattered everywhere. You can scan them and you have access to all the guest information, company information, feedback form, donation page if you want to support the work that we're doing, and you can find everything, future performances, future workshop, everything is there. I think that answered the question. I think we're going to take a little break. There's refreshments coming up, so everybody can just get themselves water, tea, coffee, biscuits. It's just on the outside. There is an accessible toilet just on the right as you leave the room. There is a lift just after that if you need to go on the other accessible toilet that are below. If you go straight from that door, there is stairs going down, so please be careful. We'll have someone over there, but just so everybody's aware, there are stairs going down if you walk straight from the door. I think I said everything. Thank you very much. Thank you, Maria. Okay, everybody, we're going to start again. If everybody find their spots, there's no rush, even if you need. Also, whenever you need to move, you can move. Don't feel like because you've been sat down in an audience theater, you are stuck to that chair and you cannot move. If you need to move, please do so, okay? I am really happy to introduce you to our next guest, Jen Toksvig. Now, when I started looking at inclusivity and accessibility for blind and visually impaired people, naturally, I moved my research into the wider context and how to make the shows and the workshops more accessible for anyone, to facilitate and allow as many needs and as many people in. I was suggested Jen, and our conversation on inclusivity have been incredible, but she also accompanied me throughout the whole process of funding the company on very clear and strong values. So I'm really grateful for the work we have done together, and I'm really happy to introduce you to her. Thank you, Jen.
Hello, lovely people. Hi, Sandrine. Thank you so much for having me. I think I've completely, having listened to a bit of what was just said and the wonderful stuff before the break, I think I'm just going to change my mind about what I was going to talk about a little bit. So I should start by saying I'm a white woman in my early 50s. I have long hair that is slicked back and I wear glasses. And I am a neurodivergent theatre maker who could not access theatre in any way at all. So fourth wall theatre, my experience of it is that we don't just have a barrier at the proscenium arch between the stage and the auditorium. We each come in wearing a fourth wall box made of very fragile glass. And if somebody next to you coughs, the box is broken. If a plane goes overhead, the box is broken. And because I am neurodivergent, I cannot sit still. You will see I have knitting with me. I can't just sit still. So I couldn't go to the theatre. I can't go to the theatre. I can't make work in theatre in those circumstances. So I designed a new way of making theatre because otherwise we are very disembodied as audience members. We sit still in the darkness and we are quiet and we don't exist. So I designed a process called the Copenhagen interpretation, which is based on quantum physics. Bear with me. I'm going to get this wrong, so I apologize in advance to the quantum physicists in the room. There is a theory in quantum physics that a quantum particle exists in all of its possible forms simultaneously. And when it's observed under experimentation circumstances, it presents itself in one outfit, in one form. It goes, ta-da! And then if you look away from it and you look back again, it might have changed completely. So it's very difficult to do quantum experimentation. But the wonderful thing about the quantum world is that, and the best example of this I can give is in computing, binary computing. So the computer that I'm looking at right now works on binary computing. Most of our computers work on ones and zeros. And quantum computing behaves like nature. It is responsive. It is magical. And I maintain that live performance for an audience is the Copenhagen interpretation of the performance every time you watch a show. Every time you go and see the same play, you have a different experience of it because you feel differently on different days. If the weather is different, depends who you're with or how you got there, or whether you had a good journey or a bad journey. Your experience should be different every time, and that is called the Copenhagen interpretation in quantum physics and also in theatre. And because our access needs are all unique, because we are complex individuals who have, whether we're disabled or not, we all have a complexity of needs, support needs, and those also differ from day to day. The setup of the architecture of theatre buildings, the architecture of production just isn't really, it's not set up for human beings to watch live performance in that way. We might as well be making movies where you can press pause, go and make a cup of tea. So I have designed this thing that stitches process design, stitches access into the process design from the get-go. Although what I make is mainly plays and musicals, I actually don't worry about the story until the last minute. What I worry about is, can we all get into a room together and be comfortable, or at least comfortable enough to feel uncomfortable at moments where it's awkward, or at moments where the story might be difficult, or even comfortable enough to stay even if we have some physical discomfort. And because I stitch access into the process, it is all about giving an audience member the agency to be their own first responder to their own needs. And that is about decision making, having agency of your own decision making process. So I can see you all. This is fascinating for me because I can see you all sat there watching the screen. And I love nothing more. Give me a wave. I love nothing more. Hello. Than watching audiences, because I can see who's fidgeting. I can see who looks like they're looking around the room and would rather be getting up and walking around. If that's you, please get up and walk around if you'd like to. I do not mind. No one else is going to care. Please feel free to just get up and walk if you want to move, or move around, or stand up and turn around, or whatever you like. It's so interesting to me that earlier I was listening to somebody say, what should dance look like? And I asked myself, what should a play look like? And I'm going to tell you about my hero. So my hero is a guy called Harry Beck, who was tasked with redesigning the London Underground map because it was getting really complicated. There were new lines and it was difficult to draw it. Geographically, it's very awkward to draw. And Harry Beck took a look at this map, and he designed the modern underground map that we know and love today. And it's not geographically correct at all. I don't know if some people may not know that. The underground map that we have today doesn't have any reflection on the actual geography of London, because Harry Beck looked at his task of designing a map and he said, the first thing I'm going to get rid of is geography. And it's just, he's my hero for being like, I'm going to design you a map, but I'm not going to use geography. And I design theatre, but I don't have an audience, and I don't care about story until the last minute. Because all of our rules and the things that inhibit us, all of our barriers exist in the way that we have dictated an audience should engage with story. And I disagree with those things. So I left out the audience. I make them participants, and I've left out the story because it will take care of itself. Story is more powerful than anything. It will take care of itself. What I care about is how we gather. So there are various methods that I use within the Copenhagen interpretation to provide access or support access. And I'm happy to talk about those, but I don't want to wither on about it for hours. But I will say that it allows us to be curious. I think participation should be about curiosity, and curiosity requires consent. It requires that we can consent to be in a room because we feel comfortable enough to be there. I don't think there's any such thing as a safe space. I think people who say this is a safe space are lying, because only the individual in question can say if they feel safe, and they can only say that from moment to moment. So I can't even say, now I'm sat in a room that is in my house, and I can't even say this is a safe space. There's drilling going on next door. I might not feel very safe in a minute. So I think safe space and those phrases that we use are actually really not very useful. I feel that way because I'm autistic and I'm very literal about things. So if you tell me it's a safe space, I don't believe you. So I think we need to look at the language that we use. I think we need to look at the processes that we assume are supporting us and say, are they really? How are they doing that? Why are they doing it like that? So that's the basis of my work and how I feel about access. I use various processes, including a process called open space technology, which I've slightly redesigned to make my work with. But again, everything I use allows people to have their own agency and to be their own first responders. Sandrine, is there anything specifically that you wanted me to talk about in terms of my practice over and above that?
Hello, yeah. Jen,
Hey, darling.
I thought you could talk a little bit about open space,
Yes,
because
I
that
can.
definitely made me
Yeah.
think a lot. And then you can talk a little bit about the accompanying, which I think
Yeah.
would be lovely.
Mhm.
Thank you.
I'm being led by Sandrine because there are many aspects of when you have to make something accessible for everybody, anybody, for any given day. There's a lot of it. But the foundation of it is called open space technology, which is a complicated name for a simple thing. A guy called Harrison Owen spent a year organizing a conference. He booked venues and speakers and made up schedules and things. And when he got to the conference, he realized that the only really useful work was being done in the coffee break, which was the one thing that he had not organized. When people were free to walk around and talk to whomever they pleased about whatever they wanted, for as long as they wanted, and then move on. And so he described what is basically a coffee break. And it's a very Zen thing. The principles of it are you all come into a room, a big group of you, and you are there under the one question. Like there's a big theatre one every year called What Are We Doing About Theatre? So there's a question that brings everyone to the space. And then you can call a session and talk about what you are interested in talking about. And people can join you or not whenever they like. And you can join other people or not whenever you like. So whoever comes to join you is the right people for you to talk to because they are the people who are there. It's very driven by what you're passionate about in that moment and how much energy you have. And wherever it happens is the right place. So if you're intending to talk in the blue room, but instead you bump into each other in the loo and you have a chat there, that's the right place. Have the conversation. It's a very Zen process. And we use it as the basis for the theatre making. It has some patterns of behaviour in it that Harrison observed. One is bumblebeeing, which is people who go from conversation to conversation and they take little bits of the conversations around the room and they cross-pollinate ideas around the group. It's a very exciting thing. My favourite one is butterflying, which is you just hover and look beautiful and have absolutely no responsibility whatsoever. What butterflying does, which is really wonderful, is people know that the process is that you're bearing witness to what's going on in the room, and that's a really beautiful thing. And it allows you to have a sort of overview, maybe what's happening. I'm a bit butterflying you lot at the moment because I can see you all. I have a bit of an overview, which is lovely. I've added one. I've completely added stuff and changed stuff, and Harrison would entirely support that. I've added bluebirds, and I think it's interesting that what we seek. So there's a famous story about two kids who leave home seeking a bluebird of hope, and it's very much about seeking a magical solution that actually sort of doesn't exist. But I do think that what we seek is what we hope for, which is rarely actually what we find, but it doesn't matter because engaging in the journey itself of seeking something and hoping for something is what opens us up to the possibility of discovery. And often I think we discover that what we wanted was not a bluebird. And sometimes it's over the rainbow, it's that, oh, I need to be home. What I wanted was at home all along. But it doesn't matter what you find out there. I think just setting out on the journey is the important thing. And I think anywhere that is barriered and inaccessible to somebody means that there is no opportunity, no invitation to go on to start out on a journey. And that's what frustrates me about inaccessibility in theatre and dance and opera and musicals and all of that stuff. What was the other thing? Oh, accompanying. So accompanying is a thing so because I have ADHD and I'm autistic, and there's a thing called body doubling, which people who have ADHD can find useful, which is where someone literally comes and sits in the room with you and says, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to read my book until you've written that email you've been putting off. And because they're there expecting you to do that thing, you're more likely to do that thing. And it sounds like it's an authority thing, and it really isn't. It's an accountability thing, which is very different. So and also there's somebody with you, and that can be when something is very challenging to do. It can be lovely that someone's just like, I'm here with you while you do it, because I know it's challenging for you. So I stitched into Copenhagen a process called accompanying, which is where you can have an accompanist, a companion who's with you. If they're only with you to show you where the loos are or get you to the bar, that's fine. Or they might be a BSL interpreter, or they might be a dog, or they might be your friend that you came with, but you know that you're accompanying each other. So you deepen each other's experience by asking questions. How did you feel about that scene, that moment? I saw that thing made you jump. How do you feel about that? So it can be anything that you want. But what it means is we are connected. And one of the great goals for me with Copenhagen is people say all the time, oh, theatre is such a collective experience. It's such a communal experience. We're on the room together. But you're all sitting staring at a screen. You're not talking to each other. You'll leave maybe not knowing who else is in the room. I think just because we're collected in the same place doesn't mean we're connected in any way. I don't think I think it's really unfair to say that of theatre. I think it's really, and we feel responsible. We feel like we should say, oh yeah, we're all in it together. We all laughed at the same thing. But that's meaningless. It's meaningless. So my goal was also to make these experiences of story proper, embedded, collaborative, connected experiences, and accompanying does that. So when I worked with Sandrine, I also accompany people on their journeys, making discoveries about their work and helping them understand what it is they're actually trying, what their bluebird is. I help people. I go on journeys with people. I walk beside them and I ask them questions in the search for their bluebird. And it is a magnificent privilege for me. I find it very moving that I get to do that with people. And that is accompanying. It's just being there. It's just being there. That's it. Is there more? Sandrine, help me know what to talk about, because there's like a million things.
I mean, that was beautiful what you just said. I was wondering if maybe we should just open up to the room and see if anyone has any question.
Yeah.
And then maybe that might stimulate something, and you know what?
I have a few thoughts about dance, but I feel, although I've done some dance training, I can do a triple pickup time step with a buffalo break. That's my claim to fame in the dance world. But I haven't danced for a long time, but I have some thoughts about dance and accessibility. But I didn't know whether to share them because I'm not officially here in that capacity.
Does anyone have any question? No, not formed yet.
It's cool. It's cool.
Maybe just talk about dance then, because
I mean, they're just little thoughts. So my favorite thing to do when part of being neurodivergent is overwhelm and physical tension. And one of my favorite things to do is ride a carousel. It feels like dancing to me. It feels like freedom and dance. And my best friend's child is neurodivergent. And when she's feeling overwhelmed, they go to the park so she can swing. And that's rhythmic and it's physical pressure. And it feels like dancing to me. And it occurred to me, I had a conversation with some visually impaired people that I'm hoping to do some consultation with. And it was a difficult conversation because I didn't hold the space very well. And I came away thinking, I'm not sure there is anything I can do. I rang Helen to say, I've messed up. I'm failing at this. I don't know how to hold this space. It's very difficult to understand. And it's very difficult to see where, because of clashes of access needs, specifically with visual impairment, where I can be helpful in terms of access to theatre. And I remember one of them said, and this really stuck with me, that I said, what do you want when you go to the theatre? And they said, just to be able to go to the theatre on my own is the thing. Don't give me, like, I don't want to need a person to help me. Like, tell me where the venue is, help me get to the venue, help me know where the loos are. But then just fuck off and leave me alone. I don't need someone there. And it's really interesting to me that there should be opportunity for visually impaired people to safely and freely dance alone, apart from anything else. Like it should be that as much as every other opportunity to do any other thing. There should also be opportunity for everyone to, on their own, go to the theatre and have the freedom to access it in any way they want, including sitting still in the darkness. I have a person in the room who defends people's right to have that experience as well, because it's equally important. So I feel like there is absolutely room for us to be doing collaborative work, but we should also be able to just dance on our own freely and safely. Those were my thoughts about dance.
Hello. Hello, Jen Togsvig. It's Helen Davies
Hello.
here.
Hello, I love you.
I love you more. Now I've got an equity card.
Yes.
I'm just wondering when we will be in a world that is also inclusive on stages.
Yeah.
In the West End.
Yeah, I mean, there is much work that is being done in that regard by the heads of access. Yeah. So I work closely with the head of access at the National, David Bellwood, and the head of access at the RSC, Josepha McKinnon, and the head of access at the Globe, Sarah Howard. And they're all wonderful, wonderful people. Yep. And the Globe particularly has done a lot of casting around visually impaired performers and with BSL users for whom BSL is their primary language. Yeah, but it's the architecture of theatre does not support it.
That's not an answer.
Yeah, and the architecture of production does not support it. And for as long as that's true, for as long as we make the audience sit quietly and still, that's going to be hard. And the other thing we do is we make people listen to a story from start to finish. And one of my great battles in life is to say, look, you all have done this, I bet. Mm-hmm. Walk through the living room when the TV's on to go and make yourself a cup of tea, and there's something on the telly and you don't know what it is, but two people are arguing. And you hover in the room to see what the outcome of the argument is. And then you go and make your tea, and you don't have to sit and enjoy the whole program to be engaged for a moment by two people having a dramatic moment. And we have this weird thing that we've decided since civilization started writing stories down, that we are obliged to follow a story from beginning to middle to end in order to be able to have any kind of engagement with it, which is frankly rubbish. I mean, there is great value in following a story from beginning to middle and end. I'm a writer. I write stories with beginnings and middles and ends. But if you only engage with 5 minutes of that, I'm not the person who's going to tell you that's not a valuable experience for you. So that's the other thing, is we make people sit down and shut up and listen until we've told them all of the story the way we want to tell it to them, and then we'll let them go home. And if they try and go home early, we'll frown on them. I mean, it's that mad.
Story is part of the process, part of the reason people go to theatre in the West End. I guess I'm just trying to work out how old I will be when I can play Norma Desmond at the Savoy.
I would cast you in that tomorrow. If you can help me find the funding, I'll do it with you happily.
Well, Nicole's gone to to Broadway, so you know. I don't know how many blind or partially sighted people have ever appeared in a musical.
I mean, honest to God, I would cast you in one tomorrow. I don't know why it doesn't happen. But I mean, I do know why it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen if people think it's going to be too difficult, and they're wrong.
Yeah. But there's always hope.
Yeah. There's always that bluebird.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other question? Please.
Oh, it's not a fully formed thought. I'm going to be...
That's okay. Nothing I make is fully formed ever. That's the point of the Copenhagen interpretation.
I'm an autistic ADHD too, so I was just relating to a lot that you were saying. I suppose my question is, so Joy said earlier, like, take what you need, walk around the space. Like, how, I don't know, I struggle with, like, it then not becoming, like, performative or, like, well, yeah, maybe other people...
Do you mean you struggle to stop becoming performative?
No, I struggle taking what I need and, like, when I need it in, like, spaces that, like, I feel like I should be, like, small.
Yeah.
And, do you know what I mean? So what you were saying, like, in the theatre, like, sitting, listening, like, yeah, I don't know if you've got any anything on like, yeah, just taking what you need and not being like afraid or like feeling too vulnerable doing that?
It's very difficult because I think we, and I'm not trying to speak for you, but generally I think the community of neurodivergent people have had to mask, and it's performative. I am masking right now. I can only speak to a group of people when I put on the I'm speaking to a group of people suit. And it just so happens that this kind of masking doesn't take much energy for me, but there are types that take a lot. Sitting quietly and still in an auditorium is a huge amount of masking for me. So I don't know the answer, because masking is so ingrained into us, because there are so many social expectations that are so challenging, or can be so challenging, depending on what your brand of, you know, as an individual, you will have a uniqueness about you that I can't speak to. I don't know what the easy answer is. I find it helps to have an accompanist, partly because it helps to have somebody say, are you okay? And then when you say yeah, they go, no, really, are you okay? You know, it's so accompanying partly does that for me, because there are people in the room who don't want to make a fuss, or they don't want to say what they want, or they join in because they feel they ought to. And having an accompanist there gives you somebody who can say, do you really want to? But do you really want to? It's okay to have a think about it for a minute before you decide. So it gives some buffer. So I would say that if you can ever go to a thing with a friend, do that. If you ever go and see a Punch Drunk or anything, which I never have, but if you ever do go and see a thing where there's an invitation to participate, take someone with you and say to them beforehand, ask me if I'm okay, and then ask me again, and then 5 minutes later ask me again. Because you have to sort of second guess yourself, I think. But I don't, other than that, can you give me a specific example? It's fine if you can't, but I don't know, without knowing you specifically, I'm very happy to sit and accompany you sometime if you want to talk it through. That's the other thing.
Even like as a wider thing of just like disabled community in general, yeah, just I don't know if a lot of people relate, and I assume that they do, just like taking, yeah, it's just really difficult. Yeah, just taking what you need when you need it.
Yeah, it's hard. I can't make an open invitation to people to participate under their own steam and do what they want and expect them to be able to do that. Partly because of the masking, partly because of, you know, a long history of barriers and broad social barriers outside of a theatre. Even if inside the theatre you can make it be okay. So we work a lot within what people already know is acceptable. So there are moments in theatre, like in panto, where it's great to shout out. It's expected. So you can kind of use aspects of what's already installed in a person as a trigger to allow permissions in a different situation. But it is all about permission. And it is the fact that we can't just say, well, you've got permission to do that now, and expect people to be able to. You know, you can't just let somebody out of a jail cell and be like, here's your freedom, relish it, because it's not that simple. So yeah, absolutely, I hear you that it isn't that simple. Accompanying was one of the ways that I was trying to, you know, give somebody a quiet space and a trusted person they could talk to about that, who could maybe help.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
We have another question.
It's not so much a question as it is a little bit of an interjection, I guess, and I don't want to undermine anything, but I kind of think I have a response, if that's okay. Sometimes I think the expectation is put on the individual to mask or to make changes or to find an accompanied person. And actually, if we go with the social model of disability, or we look at environments, actually if you set up the environment and the space in a way where people feel that they can do these things, then it's less nerve-wracking, or you don't have to perform then, you just do, you just exist, you just are. And I think that's the work that needs to be done for culturally and everything really with disability. And yeah, I don't necessarily agree that there isn't an answer.
I mean, the answer is the social model of disability, absolutely. The answer is there are many changes that need to be made. I don't know that there's necessarily an answer in the moment where you feel like you're being invited to do a thing and you're not comfortable doing it. But a lot of what we do with Copenhagen is to try endlessly to shift the environment to make it be as comfortable as possible for the people, for the individuals who are in there at the time. So it's continuously responsive. But yeah, what we're doing is we're working on the impact that society has had, not on the problem with the people. Absolutely, absolutely.
Thank you very much.
But I know Phelan McDermott, who's a director with Improbable Theatre Company, says, because they use a lot of improvisation, they use open space in their rehearsal processes, and when they invite actors to come and work with them who've only ever experienced very traditional rehearsal processes, he says their first week is just about persuading those people that it's okay to not do what they've had drilled into them at drama school. So that is a process, I think.
Thank you. I think what you're saying is something that we've been doing in our work as well, to try to allow people to say things when they need to say something. And we know that we still get things wrong. Today, again, it happened, and we just keep learning from those communication and how to get those channels better. Because, yeah, I mean, this conversation is just so interesting because that's something, as a company, we really try to navigate as better as we can. And we've been doing this for a couple of years, and we're still getting wrong sometimes, and there's still those moments when, oh. But I think we are learning to talk about it. When it happens, we notice it, and we try to go like, okay, so next time, we're going to do better.
Honestly, I've been doing this for years and years and years, and yesterday I held a terrible meeting and really insulted some people. I mean, I don't think anybody will ever be perfect at this, and we just have to keep going. I rang Helen and I was like, and luckily, you know, those of us who can keep going, because we have a lot of people at the other end of the phone who say, just keep going, it's fine. Yeah, it's hard, it's really hard, because you're stepping into territory where, you know, there's harm, and you risk harming more. It's difficult.
Thank you, Jen. I think this time in the conversation leads us really, really well into one Jen to another. But before, let's have a big round of applause for Jen. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's always lovely to join such beautiful conversation. I'm really enjoying listening, and I will stay listening.
Now I'm really happy to introduce you to Jen Wilson, who has come into our research kind of process after we've had a week residency when we introduced touch and how to bring touch between some of our professional dancers and Helen. It was like the first week residency, so Helen was still really new into the dance world. And coming from child and adult protection, basically every touch that we were kind of introducing felt really unsafe and inappropriate. So that kind of sent us into like the most interesting conversation. And we all had our own perspective on touch and consent, each dancers within their own education context. It was just so interesting that I was like, we need to dig deeper into how to bring that awareness of consent or lack of consent practice in the dance world. So Jen is going to introduce you to consent practice.
Have the handheld one, then I can wander about. Is that all right? I've been a drag queen and a stand-up performer for years, so I might walk about. It's kind of like my comfort zone. I'm also ADHD. It's nice to move around, flap my arms a little bit, that kind of thing. So does it bother anybody if I do move around as much as that? Okay, I probably won't, because I've got stuff to say and it's just distracting if I do a lot of that. And I might make the speakers feedback and all sorts of things, so I'll try and stay fairly still. I am Jen Wilson, Jen with a double N, Jen. So that's how you can distinguish, one of the many ways you can distinguish between me and the other Jen who was just talking now, who is amazing and I've never met, and she's just wow. My pronouns are they, them. I am very, very tall, over 6'1", and I'm wearing platform trainers. Female person, genderqueer, wearing mostly black clothes, very stripy socks, and my hair is yellow, orange and pink. And I'm looking at my phone because it will remind me about the things I want to tell you about today. So I'm a performing artist and an activist, although I don't really necessarily like that word. And I work also as a kind of coach and facilitator and a training person. And I do a lot of thinking and I do a lot of writing. And one of the things that I did was I founded the International Day of Consent. It's the 30th of November every year. Started in 2018, and I'm going to keep on marking it until the UN take it off my hands. Consent. I'm increasingly not leading with the word consent when I talk about this work, because usually when I go, I do this stuff about consent, my work's about consent, people go, she's talking about sex. I'm not. I mean, that's one area that's it's quite important you get your consent as right as you possibly can, because there's a lot of risk of harm. Or they think, oh, great, she's going to talk about flipping, data compliance, GDPR, tick boxes. Have you ticked the box to consent to the cookies? I'm not really interested in that kind of consent. It's kind of a necessary evil, that we have a line that you can cross, and a law that you can break, and some boundaries. But for me, consent is not this simple tick box binary thing. The problem with that model is that it sets up this binary, you can be right or wrong, yes or no, a line you can cross, and it makes it overly simple. And Betty Martin, who is worth looking up if you're interested particularly in embodied consent, she does a whole load of interesting stuff called the Wheel of Consent, with games that you can play that are about who's giving, who's taking, who's doing, who's receiving. It's a really interesting process, which would take me, like an hour to talk about, so I'm just mentioning it. She talks about consent not being the gatekeeper model. That's what we talk about. This sort of simplistic version of consent is a gatekeeper model, where somebody wants something from someone else, says, can I have it? And they say yes or no. And then if they say yes, on we go, and it's done. And that's extremely dangerous, because consent isn't a thing that you can get once, tick a box and go, yes, I've done it, thank you, right now I can do whatever I like. Consent is an ongoing practice. And for me, it's the process by which we navigate this space of connection. There's been lots of talk today about connection and the importance of that. And I think for me, consent is the process of how we connect and relate to each other, and to some extent to ourselves as well. So in the conventional model of consent, we're talking generally about interpersonal consent. Sex, for example, is generally a sort of one-on-one kind of thing. Sometimes there's more people involved. You can do it on your own, there are variables. But generally speaking, we're talking about, two people, and that's what we're talking about. But I see consent as operating on roughly 4 different levels. It's not that simple, but they're useful ones to think about. One is that interpersonal level. But underneath that is your own permission. We were just talking about that with the other Jen. I missed a bit because I went out to the loo. But yeah, the permission you give yourself, the permission you feel you have in any situation. Like I just took for myself when I came onto this stage, I'm going to call it a stage, the permission to say, can I have a microphone that means I can walk about, and I can walk about. And then I sort of checked with you. I gave myself the permission first. Said it's okay to not be a conventional standing in front of a microphone speaking and presenting at slides kind of a person today. But a lot of the time we don't. A lot of the time we go, right, this is the rules of this situation, so I'd better just do what's expected of me. I know that someone of my gender, my age, my social position, my role in this particular situation means that I'm supposed to behave in a particular way, and I can't possibly deviate from that. I don't give myself permission. I don't even ask the question if there's another way of doing it. So there's that, self-consent. I'll say a bit more about it maybe in a minute if there's time. And then there's the interpersonal, then there's group consent. And, you know, obviously the work that Sandrine's talking about, you get a bunch of dancers and choreographers and people like me and people who've got different abilities in a space, and that's a group dynamic. Most of us are quite used to inhabiting different group dynamics and shifting the rules without even really thinking about it. So, for example, well, I'm a parent. How I'd behave as a parent at the school gates would be very different from how I'd behave in this room here today, would be very different from how I'd behave at a family wedding, would be very different from how I'd behave if I was out in a nightclub with my mates and I'd had a few drinks. We're used to these kinds of like navigating different groups and their different expectations of us. But sometimes those rules are really explicit, and Sandrine does quite a lot as part of the process with Unbound of going, let's talk about what's okay, let's talk about what isn't okay, let's talk about where the boundaries are, let's talk about what is going to make everybody feel as safe as they possibly can be in this space, and there's a lot of discussion. A lot of times we'll walk into a room like that and very little of that will happen. There's just a sort of assumption that everybody knows what the conventions are of a rehearsal room or a workshop space or being in an audience at a theatre or whatever. And then the fourth layer of the concentric circles of consent is what I call them when I'm being grand about it. The fourth one is the systemic, the social, the cultural. And we live in systems that are not very consensual. Britain is very hierarchical. We have still the vestiges of quite a strong class system, race, ethnicity, gender, ability, disability, neurodivergence, all of those different things, height, body shape, a whole bunch of things that make us make assumptions about who has power over somebody else. And systemically, we have white supremacy, we have patriarchy, we have capitalism. These are all quite hierarchical structures, quite coercive structures that we are immersed in from the minute we're born. And someone says it's a girl or it's a boy, for example. We are suddenly defined, and that's our role in a system before we've even done anything. And so our ability then, back at the level of self, the permission that we give ourselves, is informed by all those other layers. The ways we behave in groups is informed by all those other layers. And so this notion that we are actually completely free ever to really make a free decision entirely, maybe not completely. However, 99.9% of us have some agency. Even small children have, or even animals have some agency. If you're a sentient being, you have some agency, some choice, some ability to choose whether or not you will cooperate, whether or not you will obey, whether or not you will enthusiastically join in, whether or not you will seize the microphone and march across the stage. So you have agency, we all have agency. And that is the thing that we're navigating our consent with. So I talk about consent as this thing we navigate. It's a practice we navigate. Finding connection with one another, finding connection with ourselves. And so the model that I use is the consent compass. I don't know if we've got a slide of it, have we? We have, awesome. But I will describe it because obviously that's, that's important. Well, it's a kind of a bit oval to me, but never mind, that's all right. And it's not normally these colours, but never mind. So this is my model of the consent compass. And the direction of travel is always towards connection. When we're looking for consent, when we're trying to behave consensually with each other, we're always moving towards connection, towards consensus, towards finding a way forward where everybody is comfortable to move forward together. So whoever we're interacting with, whoever we're connecting with, it's, are we comfortable to move forward together? Yes, we are, and then we will. And if somebody's not comfortable to move forward, then we don't have their consent. And that does go right back to the self as well, and to noticing, actually thinking consciously, do I want to do this? Am I willing to do this right now? In sex education, people talk about enthusiastic consent, and it's great, enthusiastic consent, in the context of educating teenagers that sex should be fun. Great. But I do not feel enthusiastic about going to the dentist. Not ever. But I still have an active agency. Yes, go ahead and drill my teeth. Go ahead and give me an injection. It's horrible. I don't want you to, but I'm willing to because it will make my teeth healthy, and it will stop me having toothache or whatever else. So it's that moving forward together. Your agency is the bit of you in the middle, your capacity to consent, you making the decision. And the outer ring of your compass is accountability. So it's really important when we move away from this checklist version of consent to recognise that we're going to get it wrong. We're going to get it wrong a lot, all the time. Hopefully, we're not going to get it wrong in a situation where somebody's going to get seriously harmed. That's where the compass comes in as a useful framework to help us check in with. But we're going to get it wrong, and the point of accountability is that we learn through getting it wrong. We go, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try going over here. Nobody's got a problem with that. Is it all right if I move another 2 steps? It's all right with Helen. Is it all right with anyone else? Right, see, now I can see that there's a consensus there. Most of you are going, yep, that's okay. So there's a little, it's throwaway practice, but if I just went over there and I could see somebody in the audience going, oh God, this is making my vision struggle, or I'm getting distracted or disengaged, then I might go, maybe I should stay still, and I'm like, so I've made a mistake, I haven't checked with someone, I've just behaved away, and I might have upset them, but I'm learning from that mistake, I'm learning from that process. And you can only ever learn by trying stuff and making mistakes, but you want those mistakes to be accountable ones. Now, there's a bit of a problem generally in our in a lot of situations, and certainly in a lot of dance situations, where the agency and the accountability are out of balance. There are some people who have a lot of agency and who are not necessarily willing to take the amount of accountability that goes with it. Yeah? And the accountability and the blame and the pain and all the shit, excuse the French, is landing on the people who have limited agency. We're not in consent there, but that's the dynamic that's going on. Okay, that's enough about that for the minute. Then you have your 4 points on the compass, and they are context, communication, curiosity, and change. And like any time you're navigating anything, you kind of need to know where you are in relation to all of them. But as I said, this is not a checklist model. If anyone tells you they're a consent expert and they can go, here's the way to get consent right, tick all these boxes and you've done it perfectly, no, just no. This is a framework to guide you. So the points on the compass are useful things to bear in mind when you're navigating towards that connection, when you're trying to use your agency and your accountability to stay in consent, in consensus. Context. That is the limits, the specifics, the boundaries and the edges of your agreement. So you've all agreed to sit here this afternoon in this room that's getting increasingly quite hot, actually, and to listen to me talking about this and to the various other speakers that have been here. That doesn't mean that anyone's going to expect you to turn up here every Friday at 3 o'clock and sit and listen to people talking to you. It's specific to today. It's specific to the agreement in this room with this group of people. This video's happening, these permissions, these agreements as a group of people. And the boundaries are really helpful because then we know the edges of this, we know the limits of this, we know what we're in, and we know when we're not in it anymore. Communication, fairly straightforward. but then again not. Obviously you need to communicate, as I did just then with that example where I said, can I walk over here? I got Helen verbally said, yes. Helen was clearly communicating that yes, it was all right for me to do this, but I hadn't got anyone else's explicit communication to move. And so I waited and said, is that okay? And waited until I'd seen maybe 90% of the people in front of me nodding their heads or going, yeah, or giving me energy that said, yes, that's fine. So making it explicit, making the communication explicit can be quite tricky, especially when we're dealing with different disabilities, different cultural backgrounds, different ages, different assumptions about what's going on here, and our own limits on ourselves about what we're comfortable saying yes or no to, whether we're able to speak up in that moment and say, hang on a minute, I'm not sure. So communication. Curiosity is the next one. Informed consent, if you like. The thing about informed consent is you don't know what you don't know until you suddenly find you don't know it. So I could say to you, shall we all have a pizza? And you might go, yeah, pizza, great. And then I tell you that I'm going to put pineapple and olives on the pizza, and you're like, I'm not so sure now. It's a bit weird. So, you're then like, well, what are you, so the curiosity is, well, what do you mean a pizza? What sort of pizza? Where from? How big a pizza? Who are we sharing it with? Are you going to put what? But pineapple and olives, that's a weird combination. Can you put the pineapple on one side and the olives on the other? Do you see what I mean? It's that getting into the curiosity about what the other people that you're navigating consent with want and know and understand about what's going on, and being curious about your own information. I think I know what a pizza is, but maybe I don't. Okay, and the last point on the compass is change. And that is that fundamental point that we are constantly in a changing landscape. And I can see now that some of you are getting tired and some of you are getting hot, and your consent to listen to me talking about this and walking about the stage with my microphone is wearing a bit thin. So the circumstances constantly change, and our consent changes with it. Again, going back to sex for a minute, I talked to a sex educator who said that some teenage lad she was doing consent education with said, oh no, we couldn't stop. No, there's a point of no return, we couldn't stop. And she said, what if your gran walked in? And they went, oh, I'd stop then. So change, we kind of got to be ready for navigating the change when it comes along. So that's the model, that's the consent compass that hopefully you can kind of imagine if you can't see it. Your agency at the middle, your accountability holding that in place, moving towards connection, and navigating with context, communication, curiosity, and change in mind. Just before I kind of finish up talking at you, I want to just make some specifics around dance quickly. So, Sandrine, I hope it's all right to say this. God, I'm going to... Well, it probably is. You teach in ballet schools sometimes, right? And in ballet schools, we've been through the whole Me Too movement, right? And safeguarding is rightly a really important thing. However, the simplistic approach that we tend to take to consent will result in ballet classes where there's things like a no-touch rule. Sounds pretty sensible. Like that way we can keep all of these little girls that are in their little tutus safe from anybody predatory, right? The problem is with that, that oversimplification means that you're developing a kind of culture of distrust, that a culture of fear and shame and harm and hiding things. Nobody is learning to navigate this stuff and to work out who they can trust and who they can't. Nobody's learning to speak up about what's okay with them and what isn't. Nobody's recognising the individuals in the room, that some people might be totally okay with holding hands and dancing in a circle, and other people just might have a real sensory problem with that. You know, my daughter is, she's not diagnosed autistic, but she has a lot of sensory issues, and like, if she doesn't want to be touched, it doesn't have to be the wrong kind of touch, it's just touch when she feels like that. So all of that oversimplification, just like, it's a massive missed opportunity, and it creates this kind of culture of keeping a system going where we're just assuming some people are going to be harmful, and we've got to keep some other people safe from them. So let's just do this like really overly simplistic sledgehammer approach to try and solve it, and it doesn't really change anything. The other thing I wanted to talk about briefly was the practice of saying no. Culturally, we are not generally expected to say no, especially if you're socialised as a girl or woman. But people of all genders in Britain, especially, we're quite, you know, like, it's rude to say no to things. You know, there's a lot of kind of assumptions about that. And in dance culture, historically, perhaps, maybe still. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a dancer. I'm in other bits of performing arts. But you know, if you're the dancer that goes, I don't want to do that, I'm not okay with that. Are you able to do that, or are you a little bit afraid that you will get the reputation for being the troublemaker that doesn't get any work now? You know. So I think I would encourage you and invite you to practice saying no in low-risk situations with your friends, with your most trusted people, and just get in the habit of recognising that no can be a complete sentence. You don't have to go, no, because I'm ever so sorry and I'd really like to, but I can't, and I've got to go to my grandma's and I'm on there. You can just go, no. And it's all right. It's okay. And the other thing I'd invite you to do, especially the male-identified people, is to, but all of you, is to get better at hearing no. It's not rude, actually. It's somebody trusts you enough to be honest with you and say, I'd rather not, actually. Then that's great. Thank you for being really clear about that, keeping yourself safe, being honest and open with me, and showing me that you trust me. That's really fucking brilliant. Sorry, I swear. I'm very sweary. Sorry. Okay, so that's saying no. Stop swearing, Jen. Just a quick one about audience as well. I spend a lot of time talking in theatre contexts about trigger warnings. There's like a massive fear in certain marketing departments that the world's gone a bit woke and we've got to put a trigger warning on everything. And oh dear God, the theatre's going to be just be, you know, oh, everybody needs a trigger warning and they all need blinking access and ooh-de-da. Right, look, just chill out, because actually content notes are really helpful for everyone. Isn't it nice to be able to go to an event and know whether there's going to be participation or not beforehand? To know that the reason they've put a 16 plus age guidance on it is because exactly what is going to happen. I just recently took my 13-year-old to see a 16 plus thing. It was the thing about Ursula the Sea Witch that was on at the Alhambra, like a silly musical about Ursula from the Little Mermaid. And it's a bit raunchy and very queer and highly camp. And there's a little bit of innuendo. But I know my 13-year-old could totally cope with that. Some 13-year-olds would be deeply offended by it. And I had to work quite hard to get that information and make that decision. So making these kinds of content notes and access practices just really core to how we always behave just makes it nicer for everyone, you know, just makes it more inclusive for everyone. So I'm on a bit of a mission to tell marketing people in the arts that. And finally, I wanted to say that consent is really very much a thing about liberation. That for me, every time we're brave enough to say, no, that's not okay with me, or hang on a minute, I've got a question, or to show up being unmasked and neurodivergent, or to be that visually impaired person who is there at the theatre going, I want to come in and I don't want to bring my carer, what are you going to do about it? No, I'm not suggesting you do that necessarily, but every time we kind of show up totally as ourselves and challenge what's expected of us and are a bit more irregular and a bit less predictable, we are subtly changing that outer circle of culture, that outer circle of system, and saying, no, that system's not working for me. So it's an invitation to do that in your individual lives, in your interpersonal interactions, in your groups, because that's your sphere of influence. You may not be able to stop what's happening on the other side of the world or run the country or make big decisions about arts funding or whatever. You can only work within your sphere of influence, and your consent, your agency, your ability to make choices is radical. And I hope that you'll seize some entitlement for yourselves and go for it.
Thank you very much. Now, it is time for a break, but if there is anyone who really has an urgent question, I don't want to just leave it. Oh, from online.
There's a question here online from Jennifer Toxvig, who says, my question for Jen is, please can we have lunch? And then she says, we have to make demands of the system until the system is forced to change to accommodate us. Systems should accommodate people, not the other way round.
Hello. I wondered if you had any thoughts or advice or practice on negotiating consent after the fact, after something has happened, which it then becomes apparent you didn't consent to, or somebody didn't, even if maybe they thought at the time they did, particularly in a way that holds space for the person who's done the overstepping of the mark and kind of moving forwards in a way that's collaborative rather than punitive.
Great. It's this accountability thing. Our social justice systems, and most of us, and the way we're socialised, is very much crime and punishment. You're a bad person. You're evil. You made a mistake. You're wrong. Leave. Go to prison. You're not allowed in the group anymore. Pylons on social media, etc. And I really, really, really think that the answer is curiosity and compassion. Obviously, when somebody has been harmed, there's a very important job to do to keep that person safe from the person who has harmed them. But in most situations, it's a misunderstanding. It's this compass gone wrong. People have strayed off somehow. There's been a miscommunication, or they thought they were still in the context where it was okay, but they're not anymore, or they haven't got the right information, or somebody's changed their mind, you know, and it's really hard in that moment. Like we were just describing, I was just describing the boys. Their gran doesn't walk in. They carry on thinking something's all right because nobody's said no yet, and then afterwards go, oh, I didn't mean to hurt you and I'm really sorry. And I think it's very, very hard. I am trained in restorative practices. Restorative justice is a wonderful exploration of that, and there are some quite interesting communities and individuals doing work around it, but it is a huge, huge area that needs work. So, yeah, I mean, I want to get this model out there as much as possible instead of the tick box thing, because I think that's the problem, is people are frightened to say yes or to say no, to get it wrong, to get it, you know, the right wrong thing. But like Sandrine was describing, this boundaried space. No space is safe, but it's as safe as it can be because you've got all of this going on in the room. And the empowerment that gives you when you've experienced in it and been in it for a short period of time, you kind of go out into the world and go, the world's not like this. But you've kind of got it with you, and it's really useful. So, yeah.
Thank you, Jen.
Hello. Thank you for everything you've said so far. I wanted to ask, when you are working in a group of people, maybe this, for the purpose of this example, let's say it is work you've all turned up for, and you are faced with people's different access needs, and those access needs clash, whether that is due to neurodiversity or disability or just being a human with a preference. How do you maintain productivity in a working environment when you know that not everyone's access needs can be met?
I think there isn't, I haven't got a magic wand, but I think that it does go down to taking time to do the navigation and to enable people to be heard and to hear each other, and to find the place where we're willing to move forward together. And sometimes that might mean somebody needs special treatment and not being in the room with everyone else and doing something different. A great example was, I was talking consent with some people who do arts with people with severe learning difficulties, and they had a group of people who'd made brilliant costumes to be part of a carnival, and they got to the start of the parade, and one person went, I don't want to do it, and they had a whole group of them. Thankfully, they'd thought ahead about this and had enough support workers with them that they could go fine, and that person could be taken and supported and looked after, and the rest of the group could continue without it being a problem because they'd planned ahead for that. If they hadn't planned ahead for that in that situation, you would be in a kind of, right, okay, how do I now keep most people happy in the best way that I can? Is there a way to go, right, we can't do the parade, but we can do our own parade? Or is there a way to find out why that person suddenly doesn't want to do it, and is there anything that could help them to feel safe enough to do it now, but without them feeling the pressure that everybody else, you know, the thin line between cajole and coerce, you know, and it's nuanced and it's difficult, and this is why I keep saying we'll get it wrong. You know, you can't have everyone in enthusiastic consent all the time, but you probably can find a way where you are all willing to move forward together.
Thank you.
Yeah, in terms of the clashing thing, because when you have a team working, you need to be sure that everybody is putting everything out on the table. And earlier in your steps example, you mentioned energy as a way of consent as well, that you could feel the room energetically giving you the consent. But if you are moving forward to a place as a team, do you ever catch yourself feeling energy from someone who you therefore feel like might not have put everything out on the table? And how do you spot that?
I think one of the big bits of this is about trust and the nature of trust and how it grows over time. And I quite like Brené Brown. Not everybody likes her. She told a great story about how her daughter came home from school devastated because she'd told a friend a secret, and this friend had told all of the rest of the class the secret, and she was mortified and embarrassed. And Brené Brown talked about how the teacher used to throw marbles into a jar every time the whole class did something good. Oh, let's put a few marbles in the jar. And when the jar was full, they'd have a whole class celebration. And this was a kind of building up of trust of the class over time that was very visual and representative. And her daughter then started to sort of, well, not physically, but mentally kind of go, right, I've got marble jar friends. And they're the people that I've built this relationship with. We're up with over time. So I think in the instance you're talking about, it's maybe you've just gone a bit too fast over here and not everybody's kept up with you. And for whatever reason, someone in that group is holding back. They're not ready to share and be honest and open with everyone. And that will require all of the nuance of communication and curiosity and stuff to kind of unpack. But that's where the boundaries come in as well. You know, like if you have all agreed that that's what you're going to do, and you carry on and do it, and someone goes, hang on a minute, I didn't agree to this, you have got well, those are our boundaries. That's how we've all agreed we'll behave in here. I mean, mine would be, for example, around trans inclusion. I run a lot of open groups and things like that, but if I will not have people in my groups who are going to be speaking hate about trans people. I will just go, that's not welcome in this boundaried space. I'm not saying I won't have a conversation with you outside of it about it, but in this boundaried space, no. And so, yeah, it's about the context, the limits, and the boundaries, and taking them with you or not. They've breached the rules by going, I'm not going to be honest with you. So it's how you handle that.
So you can almost have a boundary of trust in your group, and therefore, be certain everybody's
And I keep checking in, and is everyone still okay? Is everyone still okay? Are we all okay? Are we still okay? Oh, wait a minute. Let's just check. Okay, and on we go. And that's, that'll usually be how it works, but occasionally you'll have an outlier that's just, not going to be able to fit into that particular space.
Thank you very much. We've run over a little bit.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's good because the conversations are really interesting, and it's all about sharing that space together and exchanging. So, yes, really, really lovely. Thank you so much.
Can I say one more thing?
You go.
I would really, really, really like to create, Sandrine and I have talked about this, create a kind of manifesto for consent in the performing arts. If any of you are interested in taking this work forward and talking about how we practice it in your practice, whatever your practice is, and working with us on making some recommendations around this kind of work, I would love to hear from you. My email is jen@irregular.org.uk, and that's probably in the blurb somewhere.
It's all on the Eventbrite and in the QR code if you scan them. And we're going to take a 10-minute break, so if we can come back at 10:02. And scan the QR codes, and if QR codes are not accessible, we have a really big sheets of paper on the wall with Sharpies. You can write on it. So your feedback really, really means a lot. So please find a way that is the most accessible for yourself to give them to us. Thank you very much. See you in 10 minutes. We're moving on to talk about a different aspect of our work, and it's something that we've been working for now a year and a half, 2 years, and it's development of a full-length work with a mixed cast of blind and visually impaired performers and sighted performers. It's taken a lot of development, and our initial research, as I said earlier, was very much about how making the space more inclusive for blind and visually impaired dancers. But then when we started working towards a show, we were like, how do we make that performance more accessible for blind and visually impaired audiences? So we're a little bit later on in terms of the research, so we're still at the beginning, we still have a lot to learn, this we know. But we are aiming to create a show that is as much a visual experience as an oral experience. We are trying to make sure the audio description is not an add-on, that's just an afterthought, or that is just something for the blind and visually impaired audience to experience. We're trying to see the audio description, we call it audio experience, as the entire creative part of the show. And the piece in itself will be exploring, well, the piece stems from all the conversation we've had for the past 2 years with the groups, with the dancers, and understanding the living experience of blind people. So the piece is a reflection of their living experience and how it mirrors some just human fears and anxiety, and how we can conquer those fears and those anxiety by finding connection and moving together in freedom. We're going to present to you a short extract of the piece. It's a very early draft of a duet we've been working on. It's a duet where we've been questioning trust. We've talked a lot about trust today, but where does trust sit in a relationship between a blind person and a sighted person, or where is it assumed? So that's some of the questions we've had. That's a very early draft, and that's really an extract, and I think it's probably going to be the seed for a full-length work. That's a second work, because there's a lot in there. There is a lot in those questions. But we're going to show you this extract. As I say, it's early on, so be kind with it. It's still really fragile. We used words as stimuli for the for creating movement. So the words that you're gonna hear are a reflection of the movement and the relationship between the dancers. The performers are Helen. Helen is a tall white woman with unruly hair. And Tammy is a woman with shaved hair. Enjoy. grab some water for Helen, please? Catch your breath. I hope you enjoyed the duet. I'm going to give Helen just a bit of time to catch her breath because she's our next guest speaker. Helen joined us in autumn 2022. She was one of the first participants in our Bradford group. And since then, she's become a key person in our company. She's one of our performers, creative collaborators, and she is a director in our board. She helps us stir our mission, our vision, and kind of make sure we do what we say on the tin, like she would say. Helen's background in child and adult protection and adversity trauma resilience course has really informed the way we do our work, but I'm gonna let her tell you all about her experience and her work with the company. Thank you, Helen.
Thank you everybody for coming. What an opportunity. What a privilege it is to have Sandrine Monin on this world, on this planet. Sandrine Monin is an exceptional person. Yes, I'm the one with the unruly hair, and I love it. I love it. I had so many years being told to have my hair cut short, and I don't want that. So my name's Helen. I'm getting to late middle age, believe it or not. And I hugely value everybody that's here, everybody that's online. Thank you to all of the technicians, everybody, the producer that's here. Because we are a tiny, tiny company. A tiny company. And we're still learning. I know there are over 2 million people living in the UK with some visual impairment, some partial sight. I know there are 340,000 people that have registered or have been registered as being registered blind or registered partial sight. That is a choice. So there are going to be many thousands more. I know in my own local authority there are more than 3,000 blind or partially sighted people on the Bradford Register. We're new. And when I first fell in love with this process was in November 22. And I received a telephone call from Simon Lebet, who was a rehabilitation officer at Morley Street, so for Bradford Adult Services, to support people who have never had sight or have lost sight through accident, through illness, you name it. There's hundreds of different reasons why people live with partial sight. Some people say they live with sight loss. Some people say they are partially sighted. I actually say I'm registered blind, and then people will say, well, you can see a little bit, and I can see a little bit, but I can only see 3 degrees out of 120. And what we're to remember is that sight loss is unique, or partial sight, or somebody's vision is unique to them. My sister has the same diagnosis as me, and I know there's at least one other person in the audience with the same diagnosis of retinitis pigmentosa. It's pigmentation growing on the retina from the outside in. So it's very central tunnel vision, no peripheral vision whatsoever. And that restricted vision, that residual vision that's still left, is greatly impacted on by light. So when there's too much light, it takes all the vision I've got. When I'm out in the dark, it takes all the vision I've got. What we've to remember is the vision is unique to the person. I know my friend, my sister, same diagnosis, but we all see different things. And we can't all be treated the same because we're not all the same. What I have learned over the years, because I was registered blind in 2001, and it was a real shock. And I only really did it because I was so frightened that I couldn't do my job well enough. I was a deputy manager looking after young people leaving care. And I knew that I possibly couldn't give a clear description of what the young people were leaving when they were last seen. So I plucked up courage to go to Leeds General Infirmary, 21st of November, 2001, 2:30, and I was seen by an expert in ophthalmology, Mr. Woon at Leeds. And he said, after looking in my eyes for not very long, I can register you partially sighted, but you're really blind. And it was the first time I'd been told that, because my mum and dad decided not to tell me and my sister that we were going to lose our sight. That was their decision. So it was a heck of a shock on that day when the diagnosis was given to me, and I said, well, what's the benefit of being registered blind? Oh, half-price television licence, bus pass, blue badges, yeah. But it's a massive label. And then to live with that, after years and years of being frightened, I remember coming into Leeds, my city of birth, I would get off a bus where I knew there would be a big issue seller selling magazines, and I would buy a magazine and I would roll it up in front of me and walk round with it hesitantly. It didn't stop me falling downstairs. It didn't protect me up here. But I knew if I was holding it in front of me, I wouldn't bump into somebody. My biggest fear is hurting anybody, unless I'm playing rugby. Unless it's, 6 of one and half a dozen of another. But what the dance has helped me understand is, and I think when I'd been registered blind on that day, I was with somebody that's in the audience now, and we were really, really shocked. Had no support. The expert in diagnosing the disease, I'd never seen him again. But I'm the expert at living with it. When I first met Sandrine in November 22, after taking up on the request from Simon Lebet to go and get involved in a workshop for blind people dancing, I said to Elizabeth, she's in the audience, I said, oh, it's going to be line dancing. Don't really want to do that. Don't want to do that with a load of blind people. It's not what I do. Or Morris dancing or anything. But Liz said, oh, come on, we'll go. And we did. And it's honestly helped every aspect of my life and my understanding of things that I thought I already knew. Because on the very first day, met Sandrine, and I said, what is it we're doing? And she sat on the floor and read to 4 of us, 4 different people that she'd never met before, and explained what her dream was and how the work she'd done in London before coming here, the working with the composer, the working with Maria, the professor with the sound. And I said, well, who's funding it? And she said, the Arts Council. I thought, oh my word, this is big. This is something completely different. And then in that very first session, Sandrine asked myself and the other participants if we wanted to, if we could, close our eyes. And I did. And because of the setting, because of Sandrine's voice, because of her guidance, I knew I would be safe in that room. I was very aware of not moving around and bumping into other people. But when you're asked or given permission to close your eyes and not see at all, it reinforces it's not about what you can see. It's not about what you can't see. It's about the dance, and it's really about the dance. And those of you that know me know I can entertain people. From a very adapted childhood. My sister's saying yes. But this is different, because this isn't about entertaining people. This is about me giving myself permission to be me. Thank you, sister. But there's so much that's got to be in place. And you know from the guest speakers today that we are mirroring trauma-informed practice, and trauma-informed practice looks at trust. We've spoken, everybody's mentioned trust. We speak about collaboration. That's us all working together, acknowledging that we're all uniquely different, but we have to challenge each other. Sandrine and I really had a little bit of a head-to-head today, but it had to happen because I'm too old and long in the tooth not to do what I say is doing on the tin. It has to be ethical, it has to be moral, it has to be compassionate, because we're inviting people in their most vulnerable state to come and dance. If you can imagine leaving your house with your eyes shut, finding your way to a bus stop, getting on a bus, getting into Leeds to the busyness of the bus station, waiting for friends, then navigating the 3 roads by the playhouse. We do it in tandem now. There's 3 of us that do it. Thank you so much for mentioning the social model of disability up there earlier. The social model of disability was developed in the 1980s, and still people don't know about it. The massive amount of work that is done by disabled people who still feel as though they're not listened to. We have to listen. It's the root of trust. It's the root of safety. It's the root of choice and control. Having those sonic sound little bits, really, truthfully, they have worked every time we have rehearsed. But Maria confirmed and said she thinks that they're very sensitive to stress. So if you notice when I was dancing, I didn't actually feel stressed, but had been stressed before that because it's anxiety raising, but it stopped. But I knew to keep going because I knew it would come back on, because we're in a safe environment. We trust each other and you can't get anything wrong. When you're living in a fully sighted world, as somebody with impaired vision, partial sight, blindness, whichever terminology you want to choose, there's a constant fear of being wrong. There's a constant fear of anticipating what you're supposed to be doing. When Sandrine spoke about the neck, the top of the back in the neck and the head, and the movement that we are getting our bodies into because we're becoming more body conscious and body movement conscious, that really frees up the heavy head. Because if you live with sight loss or blindness or visual impairment, you're anticipating all the time. So you're crunching your shoulders. How many knots have you got in your shoulders, sister? Lots. It's huge. But this dance, it's not about what you can see. It's not about what you can't see. It's about the dance. And we are brand new. We know we have got so much more to learn. And I said to Sandrine right at the start, not all blind or partially sighted people come in neat packages. We all are here today. The thing we've got in common today is that we're interested in the launch of Unbound Dance Theatre. Everything else about us is uniquely different. We've all had a different history. We've all got a different background. We've all got different DNA. We've all got a different psychology, a way of coping. But I know what dance has embedded in me deeply is that hope is so much stronger than fear. And if we have that and understand that and accept people and listen to people and have empathy and have compassion, we will be able to do our bit. We can't take over the world, we're tiny. We're reliant on funding. We're reliant on a lot of time when nobody's getting paid to do it. But our intention is to be inclusive, listen to people's lived experiences and learn. And I feel very proud of being part of that. And I can't tell you how proud I am of Sandrine Monin, because she's something else. And she has created all of this. And already, she thinks I'm cheesy sometimes, but she has helped so many people change their lives and have that opportunity. That opportunity to be free, to not be worried about making a mistake, to make those choices, to stand together and have a sense of belonging and a sense of community. So thank you, Sandrine. Any questions, because the wardrobe's open?
Thank you, Helen. Just like what she said, any questions?
What we mustn't ever do is underestimate or not listen to somebody's lived experience. It's theirs. A new word that I've learned in dance is having your own agency, and that is embodied in the way you move, the ability to move. And I know that some people already accessing Unbound Dance Theatre maybe in a wheelchair, maybe have learning disabilities. It's not exclusive to blind and sight loss, because nobody comes in a neat package. Any questions, please?
My question, I think, is about what you were talking when you described the physicality that you tend to create in order to protect yourself, and, you know, very rightly, because and I'm just wondering if all this adventure with Sandrine and having the safety that you described, moving, did that translate to outside the studio, outside dancing, or was it just more of like a release of the tension that you usually have? And just, I'm more interested, I guess, about that
That's a
area.
really good question, because internally I'm just a bag of nerves, but I hide it really well with the mask. Internally I'm full of fear, full of messages that I'm always wrong. And all I really want to do is be right and be kind and be compassionate. So I think the dance has certainly helped me to understand myself, be kinder to myself, give myself a little bit more praise. And you know, it also helped me deal with a lot of those awful messages from childhood, and it helped me accept them and have empathy for them. Very difficult as a child who wasn't told that they were losing their sight to try and be part of a class of children who could read the board, who could read the book. So I adapted my behaviour and was the class clown, which wasn't easy when my mother was the dinner lady on the PTA and my dad was a senior policeman. Not good. But the dance has given me the opportunity to not be adapted. And I also believe it's given me the confidence to engage on a different level of bravery. And that's because I'm more aware of who I am and less worried about making a mistake. So it's an emotional change, it's a mental change, and it's certainly a physical change. And the only bit that's isolating about it is because we're still so new, it's difficult to describe it to my friends who've seen me clear dance floors at discos and carnage. Because it's not that anymore. So it's changed on every level. And it meets my intellectual need as well. And that shared compassion to learn from each other, to hold each other, the piece I've just done with Tammy was incredibly brave for both of us. She's been dancing for 15 years, probably more. And her style of dance is really quite liquid. And so for me to move and allow myself to touch her after working with adults and children in social care has been a massive risk for me. But to learn how to move and how a body can move when it's not just holding onto a white cane, trying to navigate somewhere, or holding onto a guide dog trying to get somewhere, but to have that freedom and dance with somebody in quite an intimate setting is incredible, and it kind of fulfills all of that need for belonging and understanding people and caring about people and choosing to be single.
Thank you so much for your generous.
Any other questions? Tammy?
Just a really quick comment on the physicality of, dance and visually impaired, and my experience as well. Like moving through the world without sight, I can only imagine it. Obviously, I am a sighted person, but I can see it through Helen, through working with Helen, that, at the start, it's like she's taking her steps like really carefully. She's like really stepping her steps. But through moving in a studio in a more safe environment and in a more creative setting, it can open more options to how she is able to move, and that kind of translates into her everyday life, moving through, your everyday environments. And that really shows because she is now, you saw her like roaming around the studio, and also outside the studio as well, maybe in a more kind of safer manner. But I think what dance I don't want to use like dance as a tool, so to say, as like, oh, dance, for health, yay. But also like how we show up there to dance, but also how dance show up for us, is to open more options. And that really is integrated. It's not just like in the studio and in everyday life.
Is this still on? It's been a massive learning curve for the professional contemporary dancers that we're dancing with. And that's where we've had the collaboration and the equality, because we're all new to it. And I think one of the things that I can definitely determine is that through being part of this dance, it's helped. I've always been resilient. I've always had to be. And resilience isn't a given thing. Resilience is typically the ability to bounce back, and some days it's very hard to bounce back. But I think, when Tammy said dance isn't a tool, I think being part of the dance has opened a whole new toolbox to me to develop a completely different level of resilience. And that's huge. That's absolutely massive.
Thank you. There is some online question.
Hi, Helen. The question online here is, what does the presence of audience do to your experience of dancing?
I'm not actually bothered they're there now, because it's not. Yes, I want to showcase what we're doing, and I want people to know what we can do and all of that. But suddenly it's not about performance. For me, it's about being in the dance. It's about using that space and that permission to feel free, to feel powerful, to feel relaxed, to feel the real deep inner bits of me that are so tightly condensed in the rest of the time. So, was I nervous knowing people were coming? Yeah, only because I want people I know and people that I don't know to understand what we are aiming to do. And what we want to do is ethical and moral and be meaningful for people. So that's the only bit. But now I don't need to dance to perform.
Thank you, Helen. I think that's just a beautiful way of closing the day. But before you go, because closing is important, like we said, first I want to thank everybody on the Unbound team from close and afar, everybody that's been involved making today happen. Thank you very much. All the guest speakers, the dancers, the tech team, producer, photographers. Thank you, all of you, in person and online, for being here. Because it's by showing the work that we're doing that coming from that question, performance just adds some visibility of what we're doing and sharing what we're doing. And I think it's by because we're not the only, there's plenty of other organizations and artists that are doing incredible inclusive work. And I really truly believe that it's by sharing, it's by working together, joining forces, that we can make dance more inclusive, and we can build an industry that will value and recognize every single one's individualities. So it's a joint effort. So thank you, multiple thank you. Thank you also to the founders, I can never say that word properly, but the funders, Art Council, Art Council, Leeds Inspired, all the organizations that have really been supporting our work, Yorkshire Dance, Kala Sangam, and so many without who we wouldn't be able to do this work. I hope you all learned something today, or that someone or something really piqued your interest and you might want to research further or inquire further or get in touch with one of the guests or with us. If you want more information about the company, QR codes, again, I'm repeating myself, but Go and check us online. Our website is unbounddancetheatre.com. Our email is info@unbounddancetheatre.com. Your feedback are so important because, like we said, we're still small and we're still learning, and it's by learning more and more that our work is going to be increasingly beneficial. So please feedback. I think there's some paper feedback form as well if you want to fill those. I have to say it as well, if you're feeling generous and want to donate to our work, we have a donation page as well that's on our website. And because it's all about sharing, we've booked the wardrobe downstairs. So if you want to continue the conversation in a more informal way, we will be in the pub downstairs and we can continue this conversation. Before I leave you, I'd like to ask you to close your eyes one more time. So if we all close our eyes one more time and just take a moment again to check in. How are we feeling now? We might be feeling differently in comparison from earlier today. And I'm going to leave you with this note, this quote from Hilary McBride. She says, "Movement is a joy alone, a human right because it is a human need, and a pathway to health and expression, a discovery of identity, an invitation to satisfaction, and a doorway to play." So I'm going to ask you together to please, let's remember that when dance isn't limited to visual standards, it becomes a universal language, accessible to all. And that movement is a tool for connection, expression, acceptance, and growth. It's a seed for positive societal change and a step towards a more inclusive and compassionate society. Let's take a deep breath in and breathe out. Thank you so much for today, everybody.